Hello again. We will talk about psychology major. Next minute, I'll give you information about what is psychology, what are psychologists, subfields, what courses do psychology majors take, related majors, work environment, how much do psychologists earn, skills you need, and is psychology right major for you? I'll answer the questions also. Let's start. What is psychology? Psychology is one of the most popular undergraduate majors. It's the scientific study of behavior, how people perceive the world, think, and act. A psychology major examines the science of human behavior and mental processes. This includes the study of the mind, the brain, and human and animal social interactions. Next slide. What are psychologists? Broadly defined, a psychologist is an educated professional with expertise in the study of human thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Practically speaking, most psychologists are experts of degrees in a particular subfield, such as social psychology or clinical psychology. While a great many psychologists are researchers, some are practitioners who deliver psychological services directly to clients or stakeholders. Most undergraduate psychology majors begin their education with a fairly simple image of psychologists in mind. The typical image of a psychologist is a therapist who works with clients in a private practice and treats individuals with mental or emotional disorders. In reality, the field of psychology is far more diverse, and a majority of psychologists are not therapists or counselors. Psychologists work in all sectors of society, including academia, private companies, public corporations, government offices, schools, consulting firms, sales departments. Various specializations related to a major in psychology may be offered by colleges and universities. These specializations may be of greater or lesser interest to you. A few of these specializations related to this field include, but are not limited to, I can read some of them, but you can also take the photograph of this slide. Applied behavior analysis, applied psychology, chemical process technology, clinical child psychology, clinical counseling and applied psychology, cognitive psychology and psycholinguistics, and etc., as you can see on the slide. Next. Humanity is incredibly diverse, and so it's unsurprising that the study of the human mind is remarkably wide and diverse field. The American Psychological Association has 54 separate divisions, each catering to a unique subset of psychologists. Psychologists specialize in a host of different areas within the field and identify themselves by many different labels. Now, I'll talk a little bit about these fields. Clinical psychology is the branch of psychology concerned with the assessment and treatment of mental illness, abnormal behavior, and psychiatric disorders. Clinical psychologists assess and treat mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders. These range from short-term crises, such as difficulties resulting from adolescent conflicts, to more severe chronic conditions such as schizophrenia. Some clinical psychologists treat specific problems exclusively, such as phobias or clinical depression. Others focus on specific populations, for instance, youth, families or couples, ethnic minority groups, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender individuals, or older people. They also consult with physicians on physical problems that have underlying psychological causes. Cognitive and perceptual psychologists study human perception, thinking, and memory. Cognitive psychologists are interested in questions such as how the mind represents reality, how people learn, and how people understand and produce language. Cognitive psychologists also study reasoning, judgment, and decision-making. Cognitive and perceptual psychologists frequently collaborate with behavioral neuroscientists to understand the biological basis of perception or cognition, or with researchers in other areas of psychology to better understand the cognitive biases in the thinking of people with depression, for example. Yes. Community psychologists work to strengthen the abilities of communities, settings, organizations, and broader social systems to meet people's needs. They help people access resources and collaborate with others to improve their lives and communities. Instead of helping individuals cope with negative circumstances like trauma or poverty, community psychologists help empower people to change those circumstances, prevent problems, and develop stronger communities. Examples of community psychology interventions include improving support for hurricane victims, partnering with neighborhoods to prevent crime, collaborating with schools to prevent bullying, and helping change policies to improve health outcomes. Community psychologists blend research and practice, partnering with diverse citizens to plan and implement community changes, advance social justice, and use research to inform and evaluate this work. This next slide. Counseling psychologists help people recognize their strengths and resources to cope with everyday problems and serious adversity. They do counseling, psychotherapy, teaching, and scientific research with individuals of all ages, families, and organizations like schools, hospitals, businesses. Counseling psychologists help people understand and take action on career and work problems. They pay attention to how problems and people differ across the lifespan, and they have great respect for the influence of differences among people, such as race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, disability status, on psychological well-being. They believe that behavior is affected by many things, including qualities of the individual like psychological, physical, or spiritual factors, and factors in the person's environment like family, society, and cultural groups. Yeah, next slide. Developmental psychologists studies the psychological development of the human being that takes place throughout life. Until recently, the primary focus was on childhood and adolescence, the most formative years, but as life expectancy in countries approaches 80 years, developmental psychologists are becoming increasingly interested in aging, especially in researching and developing ways to help older people stay as independent as possible. I'll talk about geropsychology in a minute. The next slide is about the educational psychologists. And educational psychologists concentrate on how effective teaching and learning take place. They consider a variety of factors such as human abilities, student motivation, and the effect on the classroom of the diverse races, ethnicities, and cultures. Okay. Next slide. Engineering psychologists conduct research on how people work best with machines. For example, how can a computer be designed to prevent fatigue and eye strain in people? What arrangement of an assembly line makes production most efficient? What is a reasonable workload? Most engineering psychologists work in industry, but some are employed by the government, particularly the Department of Defense. They are often known as human factors specialists. Next slide. Environmental psychologists study the dynamics of person-environment interactions. They define the term environment by broadly, including all that is natural on the planet, as well as built environments, social settings, cultural groups, or informational environments. They examine behavior evolving at various scales and from various processes. Localization, globalization. They have broad and inherently multidisciplinary focus. They recognize the need to be problem-oriented, coordinating as needed with researchers and practitioners in the other fields of psychology in related disciplines like sociology, anthropology, biology, ecology, as well as in the design fields like regional, urban, and community planning, landscape architecture, or architecture and engineering. Environmental psychologists explore such issues as common property resource management, the effect of environmental stress on human effectiveness and well-being, the characteristics of restorative environments, and human information processing. They also foster conservation behavior, helping people to craft durable behavioral responses to emerging biophysical limits. The next slide. Evolutionary psychologists study how evolutionary principles such as mutation, adaptation, and selective fitness influence human thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Because of their focus on genetically shaped behaviors that influence an organism's chances of survival, evolutionary psychologists study mating, aggression, helping behavior, and communication. Evolutionary psychologists are particularly interested in paradoxes and problems of evaluation. For example, some behaviors that were highly adaptive in our evolutionary past may no longer be adaptive in the modern world. Next slide. Experimental psychologists are interested in a wide range of psychological phenomena, including cognitive processes, comparative psychology, and learning and conditioning. They study both human and non-human animals with respect to their abilities to detect what's happening in a particular environment and to acquire and maintain responses to what is happening. Experimental psychologists work with the empirical methods, collecting data and manipulation of various within the laboratory as a way of understanding certain phenomena and advancing scientific knowledge. In addition to working in academic settings, experimental psychologists work in places as diverse as manufacturing settings, zoos, and engineering firms. Forensic psychologists apply psychological principles to legal issues. Their expertise is often essential within the judicial system. They can, for example, help a judge decide which parent should have custody of a child or evaluate a defendant's mental competence to stand trial. Forensic psychologists also conduct research on jury behavior or eyewitness testimony. Some forensic psychologists are trained in both psychology and the law. And next slide is Geropsychologists. It's your feature. Thanks to the impact of modern medicine and healthcare technology, human life expectancy has increased dramatically. While this is good news for all of us, it has now also become necessary to provide physical and mental assistance to an ever-increasing elderly population. Geropsychology is a branch of psychology that seeks to address the concerns of older adults. Mental health disorders, depression and aging, anxiety, and age-related illnesses all increase the need for older adults to seek psychological care for geropsychologists. Health psychologists specialize in how biological, psychological, and social factors affect health and illness. They study how patients handle illness, why some people don't follow medical advice, and the most effective ways to control pain or change poor health habits. They also develop healthcare strategies that foster emotional and physical well-being. Health psychologists team up with other healthcare professionals in independent practice and in hospitals to provide patients with complete health care. They educate healthcare professionals about psychological problems that arise from the pain and stress of illness and about symptoms that maybe seem too physical in origin, but actually have psychological causes. They also investigate issues that affect a large segment of society and develop and implement programs to deal with these problems. I can give you some examples like teenage pregnancy, substance abuse, risky sexual behavior, smoking, lack of exercise, and poor diet. Industrial organizational psychologists apply psychological principles and research methods to the workplace in the interest of improving productivity, health, and quality of work life. Many serve as human resources specialists, helping organizations with staffing, training, and employee development. They may provide employers with testing and other valid selection procedures in their hiring and promotion processes. Others work as management consultants in such areas as strategic planning, quality management, and coping with organizational change. Neuropsychologists and behavioral neuropsychologists explore the relationships between brain system and behavior. For example, behavioral neuropsychologists may study the way the brain creates and stores memories, or how various diseases and injuries of the brain affect emotion, perception, and behavior. They design tasks to study normal brain functions with imaging techniques such as positron emission tomography, which we know as PET, single photon emission computer tomography, which we know as SPECT, and functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. Clinical neuropsychologists also assess and treat people, and with the dramatic increase in the number of survivors of traumatic brain injury, neuropsychologists are working with healthcare teams to help brain-injured people resume productive lives. The next one is quantitative and measurement psychologists. They focus on methods and techniques for designing experiments and analyzing psychological data. Some develop new methods for performing analysis. Others create research strategies to assess the effect of social and educational programs and psychological treatment. They develop and evaluate mathematical models for psychological tests. They also propose methods for evaluating the quality and fairness of the tests. Rehabilitation psychologists work with stroke and accident victims, people with mental disabilities, and those with developmental disabilities caused by such conditions as cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and autism. They help clients adapt to their situation and improve their lives, and they frequently work with other healthcare professionals. They deal with issues of personal adjustment, interpersonal relations, the work world, and pain management. Rehabilitation psychologists are also involved in public health programs to prevent disabilities, including those caused by violence and substance abuse. And they testify in court as expert witnesses about the causes and effects of a disability and a person's rehabilitation needs. School psychologists are engaged in the delivery of comprehensive psychological services to children, adolescents, and families in schools and other applied settings. They assess and counsel students, consult with parents and school staff, and conduct behavioral interventions when appropriate. Most school districts employ psychologists full-time. Next. Now it's sports psychologists' turn, but I want to talk social psychologists before that. Social psychologists study how a person's mental life and behavior are shaped by interactions with other people. They are interested in all aspects of interpersonal relationships, including both individual and group influences, and seek ways to improve such interactions. For example, their research helps us understand how people form attitudes toward others, and when these are harmful, as in the case of prejudice, provides insight into ways to change them. Social psychologists are found in a variety of settings, from academic institutions where they teach and conduct research to advertising agencies where they study consumer attitudes and preferences, to businesses and government agencies where they help with a variety of problems in organization and management. Now it's sports psychologists' turn. Sports psychologists help athletes refine their focus on competition goals, become more motivated, and learn to deal with the anxiety and fear of failure that often accompany competition. The field is growing as sports of all kinds become more competitive and attract younger children. And typical psychology major courses. The required and elective courses you would take for psychology majors vary considerably among institutions, but I can give you some examples of courses like abnormal psychology, animal behavior, basic statistics for psychologists, cognitive psychology, counseling skills, creativity, developmental psychology, general psychology. You can see on the slide also all of them. And the next slide. Psychology-related majors. Education, human resources management, human services, neuroscience, psychobiology, social work, and sociology are related majors. But maybe I can give a little bit information about psychobiology. Psychobiology, also known as biological psychology, is a subfield of biology and psychology that deals with the interaction between the biological, things like hormones, neurotransmitters, and cells, and the social, or the way we act in our world. And work environment. Some psychologists work independently, conducting research, consulting with clients, or working with patients. Others work as part of a healthcare team, collaboration with physicians and social workers, or in school settings, working with students, teachers, parents, and other educators. Those in private practice often work evenings and weekends to accommodate clients. I can give you some common employment settings for psychologists, like mental health clinics, hospitals and physician offices, private clinics, prisons and correctional facilities, government agencies, schools, colleges, and universities. And how much do psychologists earn? The median annual wage for psychologists was $80,370 in May 2019. The median wage is the wage at which half of the workers in an occupation earned more than that amount and half earned less. The lowest 10% earned less than $45,380 and the highest 10% earned more than $132,070. I can give you some examples, like industrial organizational psychologist is $92,880, clinical counseling and school psychologist $78,200, hospital, state, local, and private $88,480, elementary and secondary schools, it can be state, local, or private, $76,960. Psychologists in private practice often set their own hours and many work part-time as independent consultants. They may work evenings or weekends to accommodate clients. Earning a psychology degree certainly requires a number of different skills and abilities, and as with any field of study, you should start out your education by improving your skills in these areas. Here are some of the most common skills for psychology majors. The first one is coming. The first one is math. At first glance, you might wonder why studying psychology requires math skills. After all, psychology is a study on the mind and behavior, so what does that have to do with mathematics? Psychology students need to be able to interpret data, understand probabilities and correlations, and know how to perform a range of different statistical calculations. Even if you have a limited background in mathematics, this doesn't mean that psychology is off limits. During the undergraduate years, most students are required to take several math classes to fulfill both general education and program requirements. This is a great opportunity to brush up on your numeracy skills and discover how psychologists use statistics to perform research and understand data. And the next one is communication. Psychology is all about people, so having strong interpersonal skills is important. If you're interested in pursuing a future career in mental health, you will need to be able to interact with people experiencing a wide range of psychological, emotional, and social problems. Even if you plan to become a research scientist, you will need to rely on your communication skills to convey information in both written and verbal form. Communication skills like knowing how to cope with and resolve conflict and how to comfort someone experiencing a crisis can be particularly important when pursuing a career in psychology. The other skill is research and problem solving. As a psychology student, you're going to be spending a tremendous amount of time doing research. This might involve performing literature reviews on different topics or collecting data for your own experiments. Strong research skills are vital in psychology. Psychology students receive a great deal of training on topics such as research methods. Through your psychology course, you will learn the basics of the scientific method, various research methods used in psychology, as well as how to conduct psychology experiments. And next skill, study skills. Can we see it? Yes. Doing well in your psychology classes requires excellent study skills. Juggling a full course load of complex classes that require lots of reading and contain an abundance of information means that you will need to rely on stellar study habits. These skills can include such things as spacing out your study sessions and taking good class notes. You might have already developed some great study habits in high school. However, the transition to college life sometimes makes it difficult to maintain those good habits. One way to remedy this problem is to enroll in a study skills class or look for tutoring assistance offered through your university or your school psychology department. And next skill is open-mindedness. Human behavior is a complex subject, and learning about it in detail requires an open mind. In your class, you'll be learning about various types of behaviors and mental health disorder, as well as about the different ways that people interact with one another. In order to get the most out of these classes and to ensure that you're developing an in-depth understanding of the field, it's important to be objective and flexible in your thinking and to be willing to change your mind when presented with new information. The next skill is critical thinking skills. Another important skill for psychology majors is the ability to think critically. Since you'll be learning about various psychological theories and analyzing an array of case studies in your classes, the ability to form connections between different areas of psychology and to determine which theories resonate most closely with your own ideas is an extremely important part of succeeding in this major. And the other skill is the research skills. Psychology majors also need to have well-developed research skills, including the ability to conduct experiments and to quantify and interpret data. And the next skill is patience. Psychologists must be able to demonstrate patience because research or treatment of patients may take a long time. They must also be patient when dealing with people who have mental or behavioral disorders. And the last one for me, trustworthiness. Psychologists must keep patients' problems in confidence, and patients must be able to trust psychologists' expertise in treating sensitive problems. And is psychology the right major for you? When people think psychology, most assume it's related to reading someone's mind or laying on a couch and sharing your feelings. Psychology isn't just the study of behavior. It's also the study of mental functions. Those employed in this field consider it as science, philosophy, and even an art. The main goal of psychology is to explain, predict, and control behavior and mental processes. When deciding to major in psychology, it's important to understand the many subfields and specializations within this broad major. There are so many career options for an undergraduate psychology major to pursue. Before you fully decide to become a psychology major, you need to decide if it is truly a discipline you want to devote time to. If you enjoy helping individuals or families going through personal problems, listening to them, interviewing, testing, analyzing, and collecting data, being social and creative, researching human and animal behavior, then psychology is a career path for you. Yes, now you can see the sources of the information. You can check also their websites. You can find valuable information there. In summary, psychology is always evolving and new fields and branches continue to emerge. It's important to remember that no single branch of psychology is more important or better than any other. Each specific area contributes to our understanding of many different psychological factors that influence who you are, how you behave, and how you think. By conducting research and developing new applications for psychological knowledge, professionals working in every branch of psychology are able to help people better understand themselves, confront the problems they may face, and live better lives. Thank you for coming.